Welcome back to painting class. Yesterday I had you working on transferring your image onto a sheet of watercolor paper. So hopefully you have finished your transfer. You can return your transfer sheet and your paper clips to the counter. Please make sure that you're hanging on to your reference photo. We will need to look at those each day while we're painting. If you have something like this because your transfer sheet went into your folder, transfer paper just has pencil on it. So I can take a pencil eraser and I can just get rid of any like smudges or extra stuff like from the transfer paper itself. We are going to talk today about painting the background of our photograph, or our painting. But first we're gonna look back at yesterday. And then we're gonna learn a couple of techniques. So if we think back to yesterday, we experimented with at least 3 colors to decide which of those colors we're gonna be working with for our portrait, in using that monochromatic color scheme, remembering that we are working just with one single color and water and black, and that we talked about that certain colors really have the black shift tone when we use them to make a portrait. So yesterday I showed you a couple of examples where this is me using the warm red, and the warm red itself has this orangey tone, but when I mix that warm red with the black, I do end up with this lovely brown color. So if you want a more realistic portrait, this is the way to go, but this is also a prime example of that color shift. And today we're gonna practice some background painting techniques that you can use to give your background some interest. You can see here in this portrait that my background is darker at the bottom and it gradually gets lighter as it goes to the top. This way it contrasted nicely with her dark hair, but you'll also see that it has some texture or some cloudiness to it. So we're gonna talk about how to achieve that effect in our, by painting a couple of background painting techniques today. So what you're going to need is your sketchbook. We are going to be learning 4 different techniques that you can use to paint your background. And you're gonna work with the color that you plan to paint your portrait so that you can kind of see what those colors do with these 4 techniques. So the first thing I'm going to do is just go ahead and tape my sketchbook paper in half. And then in half the opposite direction. So I have 4 squares. We're going to learn 4 different background painting techniques today in class. So I need 4 spaces. I will also need paper towel, fresh crunchy paper towel, and my paints and some water. So and like I said, you're gonna go ahead and use the color that you plan to use for your portrait, just so you can kind of see these effects with your portrait color choice. All right. So the first technique that we are going to learn is called a paper towel texture, or paper towel lift texture. So for this technique, I'm going to need a crunchy paper towel, and I am going to need a kind of a pretty nicely juicy pool of paint. So I'm gonna mix up a pool of paint that is not too watery. So you can see here, I'm using this red color, and I'm gonna just go ahead and I'm gonna paint this entire section with the color. I don't want my paint to be too dry or this texture doesn't work, but I also don't want it to be too wet or it doesn't work either. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my paper towel and I'm going to tangle it so that it has texture in it. And I'm just gonna carefully set that down. I don't wanna push too hard. And you can see where my paint was still wet. I am lifting off the texture from the paper towel. You can see where my paint was too dry and it's not working. So you do have to have just the right amount of wet dry balance. So making this paper towel lift happen, like I said, you need crunchy paper towels, and then I am working just to put that texture into the background. So that is one option for creating background texture for your project. The next technique that we're gonna learn is called a gradual wash. So again, I'm gonna mix up a nice like painty pool of my paint. This time I'm going to experiment with it with a little bit of the black mixed in. You can see I'm gonna mix it up, remembering that sometimes the color changes. So I have this kind of purpley color now. And I am going to paint like 2 stripes, 3 stripes. Then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clean my paintbrush off and get just the littlest bit of water. I'm gonna clean my paintbrush off again. Clean my paintbrush off again. And you can see what's happening as I clean my paintbrush off. Each time, my color is getting lighter and lighter. We call this a graded wash, so that my wash starts dark and gets light, or I can have it be light to dark. So I can think about having the left-hand side or the right-hand side of my background be darker, the top or the bottom, or I could work in like a halo version around my person. So this is a new technique for us. So I'm gonna have you try that one twice. So again, I'm gonna go ahead and show you how that works. I mixed in a little bit more red this time. So I'm gonna do like 3 stripes. Now I'm cleaning my paintbrush out and like letting it be a little wet. I'm gonna clean my paintbrush out again, and I'm gonna squeeze it so that it's a little bit drier and kind of pull that all the way down. So I don't wanna use too much water when I do that, or it ends up really soggy. Oh, and I don't wanna do what I just did and touch it when it's still wet. If you wanna fix it, the best time to fix it is when it's dry. Okay. We're gonna reuse one of those to make the 2-tone wash, but they have to dry first. So I'm gonna let those sit, and we're gonna talk about the next one. The next one involves you needing more than one version of your color so that you have 2 different colors to work with, or a lighter and darker version of your color, just so that we have some variation in tone with the color. And this involves me painting really wetly with my watercolor and kind of playing with the capacity of watercolor to kind of mix and blend on its own in a puddle. So my water is really dirty, and so you can see this should be just clean water, but that's how dirty my water is right now. So I'm gonna just paint my space so that I have kind of a thin coat of water all over my square. So I don't want it to be crazy puddly, but I want enough water that when I go to add some of the paint, and like I said, I want more than one color of the paint, that you can see what happens is the paint just sort of mixes into the background. So I can lift and I can turn and I can make this kind of drip and run a little bit. I can add darker and lighter versions of my color. If I want to be really experimental, I could add some splashes. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and let this dry. And as that dries, the color will just continue to mix. So you can see that I'm working with my, tipping my sketchbook now. So I can allow this just to dry. It ends up being kind of almost like a tie-dye effect. I can also, of course, choose to combine some of these methods. And I could say maybe I want to put some paper towel lift in here to lift out some highlights. Maybe I clean and dry my paintbrush off and just pull out some highlights. So there are lots of options for combining these different techniques, but you can see that I'm going to have a really nice, like, kind of cloudy background by using that wet into wet technique. All right, my first gradual wash is dry enough now. And what I'm gonna do is mix up a second version of my color. So I'm using the Cool Red, and I am going to mix up, and I used it with the water or the black to start with. So now I'm mixing it up just so that it's clean and bright. And you can see I flipped my sketchbook around because I'm gonna go from this opposite direction now, and I'm gonna do that same process. So I'm gonna do 3 stripes. I'm gonna clean my paintbrush off and stretch that all the way down so that I have, what happens here is you can see I have my color shift from one color to 2 colors. So we end up with what's called a 2-tone wash, and that can also be used in your background. Again, I can add paper towel lift if I want to that texture. Or this one here is still at the place that I can put some lift in here. So you can see I can use my paper towel. So these can kind of be combined with each other. The whole purpose of this is to not have your background try to be one solid color, but instead to have a little bit of visual interest on its own.